并没有就关税问题进行磋商或谈判，更谈不上达成协议。这场关税战是由美方发起的，中方的态度是一贯的、明确的，打奉陪到底，谈大门敞开。对话谈判必须是平等、尊重、互惠的。
Wow, I don't speak Chinese, but I can just get a sense of how measured the word and how straightforward. And this one has to do with Mr. Trump lying about, oh, we are having a conversation with the Chinese. What do you think of all this, Carl? Why will Trump lie about something of this magnitude like this?
Well, what Trump administration is trying to do right now is they're trying to calm the market, so to speak, after they have almost intentionally cratered the whole U.S. stock market. Now, if people remember back in the days when Trump first announced his Liberation Day, tariff on everybody, there are people who posting on Twitter saying, "Oh, this is such a four-dimensional chess move by the Trump administration because the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he's a guy from George Soros' quantum fund. He know what he's doing. He's really what he's trying to do is he's trying to crater the stock market intentionally. This is when the stock market was in free fall. $1 trillion have been wiped out from the U.S. stock market. They say, oh, it's all part of the plan. He did that intentionally in order so that to drive all the money from the U.S. stock market into the U.S. bond market, because traditionally U.S. Treasury and U.S. dollar are seen as kind of the last resort, the last haven, right? So people understanding is like when you sell stocks, then you put the money you get from the selling the stocks into the U.S. bond. And they say it's such a genius move because United States, as we know, U.S. is in chronic deficit. Currently, I think the national debt is something like north of $36 trillion.
We crossed 37, Carl.
37.
Just a few days ago.
So there's no way U.S. can gonna repay that debt anytime soon. So what U.S. government do is they borrow new money to pay off the old debt. So when the old U.S. Treasury became mature and when you have to pay down the debt, they go to the market, the bond market, to borrow more money in order to finance the old debt. So they said, what Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, is trying to do, he's trying to drive all the money into the U.S. bond market. So you will bring the interest rate, the bond interest rate low. So when U.S. End of by this year, by the way, U.S. have $9 trillion worth of national debt that's come due. That's
correct.
So they have to pay that debt. So they have to borrow additional $9 trillion to pay the old debt. So they say it's such a smart move if Scott Bessent managed to drive the interest rate down. So then U.S. can borrow more money, but at a lower interest rate to pay off the old debt. It's so smart, right? But things didn't go as they planned because after the stock market nosedive, the bond market became broken because somebody is selling the bonds like crazy. And the bond yield, rather than going down, spiked. So the interest rate is going up, and that's when the Trump administration came. They came back and announced 90 days, extension. They say, well, we're just kidding about placing tariff on the rest of the world. It's really about China. We're just aiming toward China. So because China retaliated, the tariff on China stays. Everybody else get a 90 days reprieve until we figure out what's going on and in which time we can negotiate new deals. So Japan, Japanese representative took the opportunity to meet with them in Washington.
Yeah.
And when the Japanese delegate asked them, okay, so what is it that United States want? They reply, what's your offer?
Which is logical question. Yeah, what do you have to offer?
and the Japanese are like, we're just really coming to Washington to find out what you really wanted out of us, and then see how far we can meet down in the middle. At the end of the day, there was no deal. The Japanese came away with the impression that the Trump administration do not know what they really want, and this is the case across the board. So now, and the next thing they said was Biden said, well, actually, Biden spring a trap on China. See, we tell people don't retaliate, and you'll be rewarded. See, now all these countries are lining up to negotiate with us, and we are giving 90 days reprieve. But the Chinese tariff stays on. But then they say, oh, it's really a 4D chess to form an anti-China coalition to get all these countries on our side. Well, Japan just announced that they're not going to go along with that. Japan publicly announced that they will not follow U.S. on implementing anti-China trade measures, because for Japan that would be suicide. They're already getting hurt in the U.S. market because of the previous tariff. The thing with Japan is they actually came to U.S. They were ready to come to U.S. before, like, for a previous tariff, for the auto tariff, because Trump slapped 25% tariff on all foreign imported auto and auto parts. So Japan was already ready to make a concession on that front, and then they get slapped with more tariffs. So from their perspective, the Trump administration not serious. These are not the people that can have a deal with, because they will just keep on slamming you with tariffs. And so they say, no, we're not going to follow along with your anti-China initiative. Now, this is Japan, a U.S. military occupied country that have traditionally always go along with U.S. no matter what. So if Japan is not going to go along with the U.S. anti-China directive, then forget about any other countries. Even Europe at this very point is negotiating with China
with the Chinese,
on removing trade barriers between EU and China. So Trump, in effect, he has made China great again. I mean, he made China even greater. David, I used to come to your show and say we're already in Asian century already.
Yes, I remember that.
Trump administration come along and said, F that, F the Asian century. Let's have an Asian millennium. Let's the Asian millennium start, because that's what the Trump tariff essentially did. Now they're driving everyone to to reach trade deal agreement with China, because they realize, oh my God, China is actually the world's strongest economy, because they're actually the ones that produce everything. Unlike what Scott Bison has said, he said, oh, they're the producer, we're the consumer. That means we have the upper hand because they need our money. Chinese need our money. Money is fungible, right? They can always find new market. They can always create new demand for consumption. But guess what? You are not going to recreate a wholesale supply chain within 4 to 5 years. That's just not possible. That's true. This is what U.S. is facing right now. They're cutting off the entire Chinese supply chain, and there's no replacement for that. When 80% of the antibiotics used in U.S. came from China, majority of the pharmaceutical ingredients come from China. What are you going to do in the next year and a half? Before new supplies can be found, replacement found, what are you going to do? You're screwed. This is why the market have reacted very negatively to Trump's tariff. And their whole gambit about bringing the interest rate down, forget about it. Bond cratered, U.S. dollar dropped, and then they very quickly just backed off. There's always people used to say, what is United States? Is it really a country or an economy? It turns out it's neither. It's an interest rate. United States is an interest rate. When the interest rate spiked, the Trump administration panicked and backed off. and that's exactly what happened. And this the interesting thing was it was not China who sold the U.S. bond, because China, as we remember, they are the second largest holder of the U.S. Treasury. They still have like 700 billion worth of Treasury. But look, for now, it looks like it's come from the Japan side. Japan, they've been the number one foreign holder of the U.S. Treasury. And what happened was, for decades, the Japanese government have kept their interest rate low. Because they've been printing a lot of yen. Japan is the one who invented quantitative easing, right? They started doing that since 90s after the Japanese asset bubble bursted. So they have been printing a lot of money, deliberately keeping the interest rate on Japanese yen very low. So what these hedge fund people do, they thought an opportunity for arbitrage. They're like, okay, we can get a lot of yen for very low interest rate. Let's just borrow a shit ton and let's invest in the US dollar denominated asset where you can get higher return. So this is called the yen carry trade, which can carry on for like over 20 years. And what happened recently is that the Japanese yen has strengthened. The Japanese interest rate is going up. And a lot of these hedge funds find themselves owe more money than they had borrowed suddenly. Suddenly they have to repay back way more than they have borrowed. So they're panicked. They panic. And what do they do when they panic? They sell. They sell the U.S. Treasury to pay back their borrowing in Japanese yen. This was what caused Trump administration to cave. And China, throughout the whole thing, they didn't do anything. they have raised their tariff, matched the Trump tariff up to 125%, and then they say, you know what, anything above 125% is ridiculous. It's meaningless because at this point, essentially, there's no direct trade between U.S. and China. So Trump administration, you guys do what you want. We're just going to ignore any further raising of tariff on your side, and that has been the Chinese position. And their position has been very clear from the beginning. They said, trade war is bad for both sides. There's no winner in trade war. We do not want a trade war. But if it's a war you want, we'll fight you to the end. But our door is always open for talks, provided the negotiation must be based on mutual respect. And then the Chinese Commerce Ministry just added that U.S. must first remove unilateral tariff before the talk can begin. So, there is no negotiation between China and U.S. I just saw one of the big accounts, Zero Hedge, on Twitter, who is circulating a rumor that somehow the Chinese trade delegations in Washington in secret, blah, blah, blah. There would be photograph of the Chinese aides outside of the Treasury Department, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is how disinformation plays out on the internet, because right around this time is the regular scheduled meeting of G20.
Wow.
So the people the G20 is scheduled to meet at this time, and guess what they're discussing? They're discussing the negative impact brought on by Trump tariffs. So this is what what's really happening, but. All the Trump supporters are posing this as China is finally buckling, bending the knee. So much winning for the Trump side. There was even a account, I forgot the name. I quote tweeted it. He basically said, mark my word, China will bend the knee by the end of this month. Bookmark this. So I quote tweeted. I say, any updates? Any updates? And there are people like, oh, there's still 6 days left in this month. Hold your horses. Still 6 days left. This is where we are. We're in comic hour, David. We're in complete. All this problem is completely self-inflicted. As I said times and again, majority of the U.S. problem is self-inflicted.
That's true.
This just epitomize the whole dysfunction we have right now. We have this whole, but you know what? Some people did benefit from this because we have observed a lot of insider trading activity, especially before Trump's announcement on Liberation Day. There's a lot of people who place a lot of call on the market. Like people are selling shorts, and those people are making shit tons of money. And I bet they're buddies, maybe with Scott Bison, maybe they're buddies with some insider. So the U.S. politicians and their cronies were always going to make out like a bandit in this. So they're the ones that's benefiting from this, not the 360, 70 million Americans or people around the world. This is how the game has always been played. You just have to understand the U.S. government is by the oligarchs for the oligarchs. and that's has always been the way it is.
Yeah, that is true. I want to go back to 3 points before we move into because I need to have your insights about the recent trip of President Xi to Cambodia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. I remember, just remind the community, when we had Einar Tangen, he really pointed out to the fact that like what you explained about the bond market regarding exactly what the Trump was doing, and that's exactly spot on. Dr. Warwick Powell also talked about the idea how this is going to go and makes it hard for the U.S. regarding this supply chain. And I remember one of our avid viewers by the name Lock1970, he did mention and spot on that, which what you mentioned, Carl, regarding the refinance of the $9 trillion that is due in June. Because here is the problem. So what will happen if we can't pay that or refinance it? That's going to become a big problem for us. And this is what exactly most Americans have no clue about where this is headed. And that's why I believe the Trump is lying about the meeting with the Chinese. We are in talks. That's all lie, because I read the transcript from different locations because the Chinese never called Trump or never reached out, because this is why I use the term strategic and economic defeat. I know some people didn't get the gist of why I titled this interview that way. It's because, to me, with what you explained, Carl, is that China has handed now a strategic defeat for the Americans. That's the way I see it. I could be wrong, but the way I see it. Let's talk about the President Xi Jinping's recent trip to Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. I'm going to play a clip for you, please, and for our community also, in both in Chinese and the English version. And I'd like to have your take on this one exactly, because I sensed that the wording was very, very, very specific for a reason why President Xi mentioned this one. So take a listen, please.
两国隔海相望，传统友好跨越千年。马来西亚谚语讲：“勤勉不息，日久成山。”建交50多年来，在双方共同努力下，中马关系坚如磐石，历久弥坚，已经成为政治上互尊互信，经济上互利共赢，文化上互鉴共促的亲密朋友和伙伴，给两国人民带来实实在在的好处。2023年，我同总理先生宣布，共建中马命运共同体，开启了双边关系新的历史篇章。
China and Malaysia are neighbors across the sea. We have a friendship that spans over 1,000 years. A Malay proverb says, "Little by little, it becomes a hill." Over the past 50 plus years, since we began formal diplomatic relations, We have worked together and built a relationship as solid as a stone and only getting stronger. We are close friends and partners. Politically, we respect and trust each other. Economically, we enjoy mutually beneficial cooperation. Culturally, we learn from and invigorate each other. This relationship is benefiting our peoples in real ways. In 2023, Prime Minister Anwar and I announced that we would build a China-Malaysia community with a shared future. A new historical chapter in our bilateral relations has since begun.
All right. What do you make of this, Carl? Because the wording to me, even though this is a presidential visit and so forth, but I noticed that President Xi had to address the social, the cultural ties between the two countries and refer to the historical ties that existed over 1,000 years for this. What is really the message that President Xi was sending not only to Malaysia, but to the whole Asian society or countries for that matter?
Well, China is right now, not simply rising. China is reemerging as a great power, and it's reemerging. It's coming back to its historical role as an important economic powerhouse for its neighborhood and the rest of the world. I mean, the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, if you really think about it, it's nothing. It's a restoring of the ancient maritime Silk Road ties, and that runs through Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia do have 1,000 years old trade ties with China. There's a lot of cultural, economic ties that goes way back, and even Singapore, who is traditionally a Western outpost in Southeast Asia, has come out publicly criticized United States on the Trump tariff deal. The whole of ASEAN is what China has been focused on, because China, people need to remember, China has been preparing for this moment since 2018, the first Trump term, when Trump first level sanction against China. And so China has been prepared. While all the U.S. think tanks have been talking about decoupling, we need to de-risk from China. China had been quietly building foundation to decouple and de-risk from United States. And the one way to do that is reach out to the countries outside the U.S., outside the so-called international community, which is U.S. and its vassal states, and to branch out to global South, for example. This is why in the last 5 years, what we've seen is ASEAN has surpassed United States as #1 trading partner of China. This is why Xi Jinping is going to Southeast Asia right now. This is the most important region economically for China. And whereas U.S. has always been the one that's pushing for countries to take a side, either U.S. or China, China's approach is very different. It's we're here to do business. As long as it benefits both us, we can do a deal. And this is a preferred method by most of the countries. If you look at all the anti-China sanction pushed by Trump or Biden administration, you actually require U.S. to coerce, to force its allies to cut off trade ties with China. For example, they did that with the chip sanction under Biden, which means Taiwan semiconductors can no longer sell to their once largest market, mainland China. That means ASML, a Dutch semiconductor equipment maker, can no longer sell to their largest market, China. It means the Korean and the Japanese suppliers are now limited from their largest export market, China. And those are all to the detriment of the U.S. allies, right? Whereas the Chinese approach is, let's just do business. I mean, the contrast couldn't be more starker. It's night and day. And what China is doing is also now the Chinese supply chains are branching out. They're branching out of China. I already talked about for example, Vietnam. In case of Vietnam, China and Vietnam, they're building railway links. And one reason Vietnam is gonna, benefit greatly from the Chinese supply chain going out is its physical proximity to China. It has all these linkages to China through railways, through ports, but Vietnam also have a very similar government to China. People tend to forget about that. Vietnam is also a communist country ruled by the Communist Party of Vietnam, and the two countries share very close cultural and cultural economic ties, and their government structure is also very similar. So even though Vietnam and China has some differences, has some historical differences, but the governing party of both places are very eager to work together and to overcome these differences. And this is why U.S. dream of somehow making Vietnam a linchpin of their strategy to contain China is just a fantasy. This is because Vietnam actually benefits from its physical proximity to China in terms of getting a lot of the relocation of the Chinese factories to Vietnam. Now, this is why U.S. now is trying to force other countries to give up on their China ties, but that's just impossible because Vietnam, they would very much like to continue to export to the United States, which is one of their largest export market. But in order to make that happen, in order to manufacture these goods, they source a lot of components, machine tools, like everything else from China. Like this is basically Vietnam became an extension of the Chinese supply chain. That's what's really happening, and this process is it's not something that can be easily rolled back at this point. And this is why Xi Jinping received a big welcome in Vietnam, and Vietnam for the first time they publicly acknowledged the Chinese role in helping Vietnam during the Vietnam War to resist American aggression. This is something that was not talked about before, but 300,000 Chinese PLA soldiers went into Vietnam during the Vietnam War. They acted as an air defense over bridges and railways that linked Vietnam to China. So that's why, despite American carpet bombing of North Vietnam, the vital supply lines connecting Vietnam and China was never cut because those Chinese soldiers were there to guard those bridges and railway from American bombing, and they're also the ones who repair it quickly after the bombing was over. So this helped Vietnam achieve their victory over America. Now Vietnam is publicly acknowledging this. This is also another sign they're signaling the changing in the relationship between the two countries. And then Malaysia has been very friendly with China for decades. Even though Malaysia also do have maritime dispute with China in South China Seas, but Malaysia and China were able to put aside their differences and developing a full-on economic cooperation, and which benefits both countries. And I went to Malaysia in 2019 and early 2020. I saw a lot of Chinese investment in the country, and there's gonna even more is coming. There's a lot of tourism, and so these ties are only going to further develop. This is regardless whatever United States does. But what Trump actually did is pushing these countries even further toward the China's camp. And this is why rather than picking up the phone and call Washington, Xi Jinping's first priority is to visit Southeast Asia, because now ASEAN is China's #1 trading partner, will continue likely to be the case for the coming decades. This is good for China and this is good for ASEAN because there's going to be a lot of development. And if you look at what U.S. is actually trying to impose on the Southeast Asian countries, now some details about the trade negotiation between U.S. and Indonesia are being leaked out. Indonesia was one of the first to send trade delegation to Washington to negotiate a deal because, according to Indonesian Finance Minister Sri, she said, we wanted to be the first, so hopefully to get on the good side of United States. But instead, at that time, Indonesia pledged to increase their import from United States to 19 billion, which will include buying the U.S. jet fighters, I believe F-15. And
wow, an old one, an old model.
And they're gonna buy. They pledge to buy U.S. Oil, liquefied petroleum gas, soybean, and wheat. Especially at the time when China had announced they after China raised 125% tariff on U.S. import. That means China is not coming to U.S. to buy the liquefied natural gas from U.S. anymore. China is not. Is gonna go turn to Brazil or Argentina to buy soybean and wheat. So Indonesia offered to buy more of those U.S. products, but instead, this is in the very initial, very early days of Trump's Liberation Day statement when U.S. announced 35% tariff on Indonesia. But after Indonesia made those offers, U.S. raised the tariff to 47% on Indonesia. This was after Indonesia was making all these willing concessions. And only later, when the bond market freaked out, did they back off and say, okay, we'll put a 90 days extension on those. So in their trade negotiation with Indonesia, they're talking about, so first they're talking about the trade deficit, and then they talk about so-called non-tariff trade barriers. Now, this is very vague. It could be anything. And one thing that U.S. want Indonesia is to change its local payment system. Indonesia now has developed a local mobile payment system using QR codes. A lot of the Indonesian vendors, you just scan the QR code with your phone and you can pay. I mean, this is, I noticed this when I came to Bali in 2019. Before I only saw this in China. And then now it's very popular in Indonesia. When you go to restaurant, whatever, you just scan a QR code and you order, you pay. It's very, very simple. But United States trade representatives said, no, that's a non-tariff trade barrier to United States because we want you to use MasterCard and Visa instead. Because these Indonesian national standard for QR payment is a barrier to entry for the U.S. MasterCard and Visa finance companies. Again, this has nothing to do with bring manufacturing. This has nothing to do with bring manufacturing to United States or reindustrialize United States. It's all about imposing control of U.S. finance and U.S. capital over the Southeast Asian countries. So why would Southeast Asian countries accept that? Why? Whereas China is not coming in and say, we don't like your QR code. You need to switch your Alipay or WeChat Pay. That people will cause an uproar. And by the way, I just came recently. I was in Thailand. I was in Bangkok. The QR, the mobile payment there is also very popular. Like even street vendors. I was walking along there like a very busy kind of CPD district of Bangkok, and they have all these like street vendors who come out during breakfast hour to provide like quick lunch or breakfast for the office workers, and they all have like little QR code. You can scan and pay with your phone. Yeah. Everybody has that. Like it's very simple. It's like U.S. is the one that's kind of like stuck in 1999, and everybody has already moved on to the 21st century. But U.S. is saying no, we don't like that. We want you to use MasterCard and Visa, so our finance companies can exploit your local market. Like why would people accept that? And especially when now there's alternative, which is China. It turns out, yes, yes, U.S. has money, but guess what? Money can be created very easily, very quickly, very easily. And there was a time in during when China's real estate bubble bursted.
Yeah.
With a Rio Grande, and a lot of the foreign investors were screaming at the Chinese investment government for creating new stimulus. You got to stimulate the economy. You got to create stimulus. But Chinese government held the line. They did not offer new stimulus back then, which means they have kept their powder dry. Now they have more room. They can, if they want to do actual stimulus to the economy, to offer more. And Chinese people, they know how to make sacrifices. I mean, there's a Chinese phrase called 吃苦, which literally means eat bitterness. I mean, the eating bitterness is kind of embedded in the Chinese psyche. I have parents who lived through famines, right? And when I grew up in 1980 China, sometimes we have meat maybe like 2 or 3 times a week. Right. Wow. This was not that long ago, man. 1920s, that's like 1980s, that's like 40 years ago, right? And so there's still generations of Chinese who have memories of the past hard time. The current hard time, the sacrifice they're going to be asking to make by the Chinese government, guess what? It's going to be, okay, you got to take more vacations. You got to spend more. You got to buy more television. You got to buy more cell phones, right? I mean, that puts nothing compared to what they have experienced in the past. Yeah. By contrast, it's Americans who are probably not ready for the pain they're about to experience because, like I said, China has been preparing this since 2018. United States, they really seriously misjudged China because they thought China would just bend the knee, like they say on social media. They think China would just accede to whatever Trump's demand is. No, that's not going to happen. Like the whole Communist Party of China's claim to legitimacy was ending the century of humiliation. The last thing they want to do is want to see them bend the knee, back like the Qing dynasty, to accede to all the unreasonable foreign demands, and that's not going to happen. So China will not bend on this, and anyone who understood China would knew this. But of course, a lot of the advisors from Trump administration apparently they have been imbibing way too much of their own propaganda, right? They're all reading from the likes of Gordon Chan, right, and Peter Navarro, and they think Chinese economy is slowing down, it's collapsing.
It's going to collapse.
They're going to have to come to us. They need our money. But that's just not what I saw when I visited China recently. I mean, this. But anyway, this is I'm done with my rant.
And we're gonna talk about your visit. Actually, I want to go back to one point you mentioned about when the real estate bubble bursted at the time. I made an argument back then, Carl, and it's on the record right there. There's a video out there that I argued back then, and I was in response to a question. And I argued and I said, Mike, my word, the Chinese government is not going to bail out those companies. They are not going to do the same mistake we did with the GFC. And everybody was like, well, no, they're going to crash the economy. I said, no, they are not going to do that because those companies are going to have to be held accountable. And China's government will not want to drag itself into something like this. And here we are. That was bad. And it became clear to me that's what's going to happen. Now, let me go back to the point of the visits of the ASEAN countries. I know for the Vietnam is a big deal because we're talking about the supply chain. And even I heard a briefing by Tim Cook, the head of Apple. Yeah, I heard it. That is like forgetting about the Chinese market. You guys going to be out of your mind if we think we're going to have to move the operations elsewhere. And his argument, Carl, was about China sort of possess the key stuff that Apples need. For example, the brain power. Because when you deal with this chips and all that, this is not for an average Joe. The second thing is the location. the manufacture where they are. The third thing has to do with the tooling, because you need specific tools for the chips and all that. China has all this in one location, and this is why Apple is saying, no, we are not going anywhere else. And my question to you, Carl, which makes me just think about, why did President Xi didn't visit Indonesia part of the trip, knowing that the Indonesian market could also play a role given where ASEAN is moving forward?
Well, Xi Jinping did place a call with the Indonesian president, Prabowo. It is kind of sometimes interesting on the reading the tea leaves. Why did Xi Jinping go to Vietnam, Malaysia, but not Indonesia? Right? Indonesia is one of the biggest country in the ASEAN, world's fourth most populous country, just after United States. But I think it could be many things. One thing is Indonesia is in the midst of its own negotiation with United States. This might complicate things if Xi Jinping was seen visiting Indonesia, so this possibly to give Indonesian breathing room in their own diplomatic and trade negotiations with United States. Because Indonesia definitely is still very important in terms of Chinese outward going investment. China is still the top foreign direct investment in Indonesia. I don't know exactly, I don't have a direct line to Xi Jinping's inner circles, so I can't tell you exactly why, but I'm just throw out educated guess here. Like one, you could be like mutually understood by Chinese side and Indonesian sides. Like, okay, Indonesia was kind of caught in a rock and a hard place, because they have been under a lot of pressure from United States. Currently, Indonesia, they depend on United States for a lot of their export, especially in like low-end manufacturing, which is what Indonesia has been focused on in the recent years. So they really wanted to keep the channel of export to United States open. But that doesn't mean Indonesia is is gonna wall itself off from China, right? Because I just don't see that happening. There's BYD is currently opening a factory here. There's more Chinese auto manufacturing that's coming to Indonesia. Like Geely is already coming, and there's other Chinese manufacturing that looking for possibilities of either entering the Indonesian market or opening start local production. So Indonesia remained very important, both for its it's for the fact that it's the biggest country physically. It's the most populous country in ASEAN, and it sits in a very strategic neighborhood. So I expect there will be follow-up of diplomatic missions to Indonesia later. A lot of these things will happen under the table. Like we will only find out much later. But right now again, because Indonesia is in the midst of trying to reach a deal with United States, so I'm just guessing this is probably just to give Indonesia more maneuver room vis-a-vis Washington.
Well, that's a possibility. To me, it was just one of those thinking outside the box. Makes me just, okay, maybe there is something there. So I figured just to ask you. Now, while we're still on ASEAN, there are some conversation right now. I've been talking to some people who sort of have an understanding of where ASEAN is headed moving forward, economically speaking, and the impact it's going to have in coordination with the Chinese regarding the global economy. There is one. Go ahead, Carl. Go ahead.
Since you brought about Tim Cook and Chinese supply chains, there's a news that just came out that Apple is going to move. They're going to seek to move their iPhone production for United States to India. So India currently already manufacture somewhere between 14 to 20% of the iPhones. So what Apple wants to do because of trade tariffs. So what Apple wants to do is they understand they can't move all the iPhone production line out of China. That's not possible in the immediate future. So they're going to try to move just enough to India, so make India supply the U.S. market. So which means everybody in the United States, all the Americans will get made in India iPhones, while everybody else in the world will get regular iPhones made in China, right? So because of the tariffs, and the thing is, I don't think in terms of manufacturing, there's a lot of talk from particularly Anglo media, like The Economist said, India is going to be the biggest winner out of this U.S.-China fight because they're going to get all these manufacturing moving there. I will argue ASEAN will be the biggest winner, actually, because China will win the fight, but the ASEAN will come out, ahead of India because because the geographic proximity to China, and this is also China. It's not just United States, but it's also China driving kind of the move into Southeast Asian countries. The Chinese government is actually encouraging Chinese firms to invest in Southeast Asia, and the Chinese factories are moving there on their own. And they will be a lot closer to the Chinese supply chain. Whereas there's already a report that they said it seems that Apple's move to shift more production to India has met some obstacles. According to some report that some Chinese suppliers of iPhone, they were told they can't sell their products. They can't sell their product to Foxconn factories to China. So they had to do like roundabout way. They set up an intermediary subsidiary in Southeast Asia to purchase those parts, and then they ship those parts to Foxconn factory in India. So anyway, it's never about bringing manufacturing back to United States, folks. They're not bringing iPhone manufacturing back to the United States. So we're just talking about they're going to shift a portion. Apple is going to shift a portion of manufacturing to India, but even that portion still depend on Chinese machines, Chinese equipment that need to be sourced from China. So this is where ASEAN has a great advantage because they're sitting on China's doorsteps. You don't have to go very far to get those Chinese suppliers and Chinese parts. And this is why I think countries like Vietnam and even Indonesia will have much better chance to move up the ladder in terms of manufacturing than say India, because India is just too far. It's just too far from China, and also ASEAN. There's also the closer economic. It's also the cultural factor. ASEAN, as Xi Jinping said, there's 1,000-year-old interaction between maritime Southeast Asia and China. So both for cultural reasons and geographic proximity, ASEAN is going to come ahead out in this game.
Yeah, let alone that the business setting in India, it's not conducive for. I mean, we all know how it is with the infrastructures. And are you going to trust the Indian government, because they're going to be hammering the foreign companies with some sort of taxes, whatever way they do it. So that's interesting enough that tomorrow I'm going to be having Jayant Bhandari, and I will be asking him this question specifically about this one. Let me go back.
Great choice.
Yeah. He's somebody I trust. Jayant doesn't hold back. So, and that's how he ought to be. He doesn't sugarcoat things that way. So, Let me go back quickly to this before we jump to the next segment here, Carl. While on ASEAN, as I said, there was some conversation regarding whether Philippines needs to step out of ASEAN because it's some sort of dragging ASEAN down. Is there some logical argument into something like this? What do you think?
Well, Philippines is kind of the sore thumb sticking out of ASEAN at this point because because ASEAN, they have been very, ASEAN is all about diplomacy. It's about inclusivity, right? Like ASEAN literally included all the Southeast Asian nations. But one of the things, for example, regarding the South China Sea dispute, ASEAN has been quietly working with China, to table the dispute to focus on development. But Philippines, ASEAN has like a code of conduct regarding South China Sea. But Philippines has been bucking the trend, right? They're the ones who are now willing to be the U.S. proxy to stir up a fight with China. And this is not what the rest of the ASEAN member want. But I don't think Philippines will be kicked out of ASEAN. It's just that what Philippines has done, other ASEAN nations are taking notice and they don't like it. And I mean, like, now the fact that they don't like it, they're barely disguising the fact that they really don't like it. Because really, the diplomacy in ASEAN and Southeast Asian countries, they like to keep everything under wrap. They want to keep it behind doors, the talks behind doors. You don't see a lot of the public, the leaders accusing each other in public because they prefer the quiet democracy, the behind door, more honest, frank exchange behind the closed door. So don't drag the fight into public. But now, even in more public arenas, the ASEAN countries have many officials have pointed out, Philippines is not what Philippines has done is not contributing to the stability of the region, right? Which is because the whole South China Sea conflict has been weaponized by the United States as now it become a flashpoint. That's not what other ASEAN countries want. They rather to deal the issue on it, on the merit of it itself. Do not get entangled with definitely not be a proxy for United States. Everyone can see what happened to Ukraine, right? The whole the region got wrecked. That's the last thing ASEAN country want to see is a war breaking out in the region. But Philippines, it's a tough case because they have a very entrenched oligarchic class that's been ruling the Filipino people for their own interests, not for the interests of the Filipino people, but for the interests of these oligarchic families who are ruling them. And right now, the last time we had sort of saw kind of independent foreign policy was under Duterte, and now they're putting a kibosh on that. That's why Duterte is been sent to ICC, and the Philippines is trying to impeach the vice president, Duterte's daughter. So it's very unfortunate because the Philippines, they have potential. They have great potential. It has 100 million people, just like Vietnam. But now they're even lagging behind in terms of manufacturing behind Vietnam. They have been offering a role in the U.S.-led globalization as call centers and stuff like that. But AI is going to replace a lot of those call center jobs. And so, and the Philippine leaders are not farsighted enough to really to try to work for the future. This is very unfortunate.
Well, the same argument has been made about India inside BRICS. And I'm one of those that have been arguing that for the presence of India in BRICS, it's just useless. It was never fit to be as part of BRICS, which we will talk about BRICS as we move forward. I need to tackle one particular point here, Carl, and this one has to do with China launching the CIPS, the China cross-border interbank payment system, the equivalency of now, I read a little bit on it. I didn't dig deep yet. The one thing that sort of caught my attention was two things: how fast it goes and the cost in comparison to SWIFT. For the SWIFT, it takes about 3 days to clear, but the cost is high. For the CIPS, it's faster within few seconds, if not within few minutes, if not seconds, and the cost is very, very low. How do you see this moving forward in reshaping the global financial system, in your opinion?
This is kind of like just like U.S. and China in general. I mean, like U.S., there's a lot of legacy ways, in U.S. that has been the norm, established norm, but it's so entrenched. Everybody uses, but you have to put up with it. But even though it's really slow, and China has been able to leapfrog by adopting latest technology and actually innovate. And so this is the story that's rolled across all sectors, not just in terms of finances. I think the Chinese system has a lot of potential to grow. Because the de-dollarization trend is going to continue. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to continue because especially what Trump is doing, it's really accelerating the trend. And now, as we've seen, dollar and U.S. Treasury is no longer the last resort. It's no longer the last haven to store your wealth. So while China is not ready to replace the U.S. dollar as you have Chinese yuan to replace dollar as a reserve currency yet, for many reasons. One is that means that China would have to give up the capital control. This is an area I don't think Chinese government is now willing to concede at this moment because there's a lot of apprehension after especially the 1997, 1998 Asian financial crisis. That's when the U.S. capital, particularly by people like Scott Bessent, the current Treasury Secretary of the United States, when he was part of George Soros' hedge fund, they preyed on the Asian currencies. At that time they led attack against the Hong Kong dollar. Right, because the Bessent was the one who famously raided the Bank of England, right, and broke the pound sterling. He tried to replicate that in Hong Kong because at that time Hong Kong was just handed over to China. There's a lot of political uncertainty, and it was in the midst of the Asian financial crisis. So Bison and George Soros they thought it was. Hong Kong dollar was ripe for the taking, but they kind of underestimate the fact that Hong Kong just had a new landlord, and China didn't want the stability of Hong Kong to be harmed in any way. And so in the end, China told the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, you got to stop this attack. And George Soros Fund lost a lot of money when they lost the bet. And I think that's something that they never truly forgave China for after all these years, because this is something they bet big and they lost because Scott Bison, from my understanding, he's very ideological. He is the one who thought, okay, there's no way authoritarian government, communist government will win against democracies, right? Like, even though he had very little understanding of the Chinese market or how the Chinese economy works, he's just been an ideological guy that he was convinced, there's no way the Chinese economy should succeed. So right now we I think the key point I'm trying to driving at is the ASEAN will be fine, even with actors like Philippines, because Philippines is kind of outlier at this point. And China had plenty of experiences dealing with like financial predators like the Wall Street types. And so this is one reason China is not ready to give up capital control and which is basically the only thing stopping yuan from becoming to replace dollar as a world reserve currency right now is because China don't want to. China don't want that to happen because also make yuan to become world reserve currency means you are going to export yuan to the rest of the world, and then what happened when you export money? You are getting you had to import goods, so you are going to have to accept a trade deficit against the rest of the world, and that's a predicament United States is in right now because the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. U.S. have to accept a trade deficit against the rest of the world because the United States is essentially exporting dollars and receiving manufactured goods, and this is a system that Trump administration is trying to change, but they don't actually understand how that works. Unfortunately, their solution is worsening the problem, and you know, because Trump still want to keep the U.S. dollar status as a world reserve currency. You have people like our Marco Rubio publicly said, you know, we have to defend the dollar, right? And defending the dollar hegemony, and it means you have to accept trade deficit. There's no way around it because you're essentially you're exporting dollar. And what that means, you have to buy goods, right? So this is what China. This is not where China wants to be. This is why, but because China is the world's largest economy, and because you know, like now people are just rather directly dealing with China, the RMB or yuan will be increasingly important trading currency. So this is why CIS has a great future ahead of it, because you know this was exemplified during the Ukraine war. You know, when Russia was kicked out of the SWIFT system, and you know that means anybody can kick out of the SWIFT system. So I think CIS will grow in importance in the coming years. It doesn't mean that, you know, the dollar is going to lose its status of world reserve currency, but it just means the yuan will be increasingly more important as a trading currency. This is because just for the simple fact that China is the world's largest trading nation. And as people in the United States found out on TikTok videos, or, you know, all these luxury brands that have been buying, essentially they're still buying made in China goods that would just got slapped with a Louis Vuitton sticker, right?
And being charged so much.
People are just you are all buying made in China goods, but when you pay extra, you're just paying for the brand and the marketing premium. And that's what people like need to understand. And so anyway, so right now, what Trump is doing is he's destroying the brand name of United States. He's destroying the whole brand name and the marketing that has been built up over the last couple hundred years. And now, you know, what's left? What is left?
Indeed. Well, I do believe, Carl, that also for China, thinking strategically, this is why I use the term strategic defeat in the title, because my thinking is that China's thinking long term, and the CIPS will be one of those sort of pathways by which now, because the move, in my opinion, by the Chinese for this one here, it's as clear as daylight. It's its desire sort of to reduce the reliance on the US dominated financial system. And it makes more sense. And not only is going to do that, but it also is going to strengthen some sort of China's own financial dealings, and even, if I may use the term, influence within the region. This is why I'm saying ASEAN, it's going to be the economic bloc where everything's going to have to go through. That's becoming clear to me, and this is why this is going to lead us to talk about the last part of this conversation here regarding BRICS, because I am thinking of both. I am thinking of BRICS, but I am also thinking of ASEAN, and each one of them has its own sort of shortcomings, if I may use the term. But before I'll ask the question on this, guys, if you have any question for Carl, I'll take 2 or 3 questions, super sticker questions, if you have 1 or 2. And I'll take this quick here, if you allow me, Carl. I want to say thank you to Soho for the super sticker. Thank you very much for this one, Soho. And if you, this is too funny, time to face reality, USA. That is correct. You're absolutely correct on this. So there is no other way of looking at it. So now we'll tackle our last, as a matter of fact, before we do this, Carl, can you share your assessment, perception about China when you visited? What caught your attentions? What strikes you as unique there?
So I actually did 2 trips. I spent 1 week in Thailand, in Bangkok, and I spent 1 week in China. And my impression when I went to Bangkok is that, this is indeed an Asian century. This was before Trump's whole Liberation Day announcement. And this was indeed the Asian century because I saw so much development since the last time I was in Bangkok, which was 2002, 23 years ago. There was, when I was in Bangkok 23 years ago, I still see rats skirling around the street. I saw elephant in the streets of Bangkok at 2 o'clock in the morning when I went downstairs to buy some stuff from the 7-Eleven. And today, Bangkok is almost unrecognizable from 23 years ago. There's so much more development. They have a very nice metro system, which I took to meet with Brian Berladek on the outskirts, and it was very, very easy to navigate. It's super clean. Their metro is new, super clean. They have these barriers to prevent people from falling into tracks or people getting pushed into tracks, as the case of New York. And they're just, it's just super clean compared to New York and Chicago. And people are super polite. It's just a night and day difference between Bangkok and United States, and things are, and there's an emerging middle class. This was very obvious to me in Bangkok. They just have a nice shopping malls like they do in United States, and at much cheaper price too. and what I noticed immediately out of the airport, out of Bangkok airport, is I saw these 4 or 5 giant billboard advertising cars, and I noticed they're all Chinese cars. They're all Chinese brands that Americans probably never heard of. The BYD, they won't know BYD, but they have Geely, they have Great Wall Motors, they have Deepal, which is made by Chang'an Motors in my hometown Chongqing, and I think I only saw one Toyota ad, in Bangkok. Like I saw maybe like one Tesla, but I saw a lot of Chinese EV on the streets of Bangkok. So apparently the Chinese EV makers, they're launching a very aggressive marketing campaign. And when I went to Lumpini Stadium to watch Muay Thai fight, and directly outside the stadium, I saw 2 Chinese car dealership. One is Deepal, which sounds Indian, but it's actually Chinese, by Chang'an Automatic Motive from my hometown Chongqing. And the next one is Volvo, which is owned by Geely, by a Chinese company, Geely, right? So that's why I call them 2 Chinese friends. And so the Japanese automakers, they're getting killed in Southeast Asia. This
Wow.
this is their traditional stronghold, right?
Yeah.
Because before, you rarely see American cars in Southeast Asia, whether Bangkok or Indonesia. It's mostly Japanese. You see a couple European cars, but mostly Japanese. But now the Chinese are taking over, and this is why a lot of the Japanese automakers are in serious trouble. And then they're getting slammed by Trump, because they're now losing out in the world's second largest auto market, which is United States. The world's largest car market is China, which has sell twice as many cars as the United States. They're already losing out to the Chinese competition in China. They are getting hit with tariff in US, and they're losing out in Southeast Asia. So the Chinese, the Japanese brand days are numbered, and the Chinese are taking over. Now about my China trip. When I went to China, I talked with taxi drivers, normal people. For them, I think the hard time was actually the economic slowdown from the post-COVID hangover and the collapse of the real estate market. That's what they talk about. When they talk about a hard time, that's what they talk about. They don't even think this tariff thing is is any of consequence, because people in the United States, they don't understand. Chinese economy, 19% of the Chinese economy is export, and out of that 19%, 15% is to the United States. If you do the math, that's only so it comes out to 3% of the Chinese economy is directly tied to export to the United States. So if you take that out, it's gonna hurt, but there's also a lot of people who will barely notice. The people in the export industry that's specifically catering to U.S. market, yes, those people are going to take a hit. But the rest, the vast majority of the Chinese economy are composed of the people who will not even barely feel anything from this whole tariff war, because Chinese economy right now is so large. I don't buy the thing that's it's smaller than U.S. or even 1.5 times as large. I think it's far larger, because if you look at the electricity consumption, if you look at the car sales, the number of cars sold in China, it's twice. It's twice the number of United States. For me, my estimate, just based on these figures, I think Chinese economy could easily be twice the size of the United States already. And most people, and the mood on the ground is festive. I went to the Boon in Shanghai, which is a touristy area. No locals in Shanghai go there. So I know everyone there is local. It's mostly domestic tourists. They're all there to have a good time. And by evening time, the police will have to come out, because the crowd got so large. Because I went on a Friday night. The crowd grows so large at night, the police have to come out to guide the crowd, so they don't have the crowd crushing incident like they had in South Korea during Halloween. But Boon at night was jam packed. Everybody went there to see kind of the light, the light getting switched on across the Shanghai riverfront. So everyone seems upbeat. Everyone seems unbothered, going about their lives. And from what I have seen in just 1 week there, being Beijing and Shanghai, there's a large middle class in China. And people will be shocked, but the size of middle class in China is already larger than the entire population of the United States. So by some estimate, the middle class, the population, the middle class in China have already reached 400 million people.
Actually, it is true.
Already
it
larger
is true.
than
I checked that information, Carl. I checked it the first time I heard it. I checked on it from different sources, and it was confirmed. The middle class in China is as big as the size of the American population.
and anecdotally, from
Yeah.
my visual, from what I see on the ground, I think I can confirm that. I mean, like
Yeah.
everyone seems happy. They have spending money there. Well, the fact that they're on vacation, right? Everyone seems to be on vacation in Shanghai. And I was walking in the Nanjing Road, which is a busy pedestrian road next to the Boon, and they have a Huawei store. I walk in. One half of the store is like Huawei phone, laptop, TV. The other half is Huawei cars, which, sorry folks, you will never see in the United States. But those cars are amazing, and they have, you know, one thing they will have is top of the line Huawei software. But I wish I could have, but those cars are only available in China right now. They're not exporting yet. But you know, the Chinese consumers get the best of everything. Not only the economy is growing, but they can get cheaper cars. You know, like you know, because you visited BYD factory. They were selling like very nice cars for like $12,000. You know, $16,000.
$16,000. That's correct.
You know, for somewhere like 20 for like a $24,000 in China, you can get very, very nice cars.
Yeah, the
like
luxury.
Nice
yeah. As a matter of fact, as a matter of fact, that $24,000, I asked the manager there, and he told, I said, what makes this car expensive? He said this is considered the luxury, and one of the key features of this car is it's voice activated and it can self-drive. If you get tired, you just give the command and the car will self-drive. I was like, what? Can I take one home? And he said they're gonna charge you the tariffs.
Yeah. Like, but even out, like even in the countries that doesn't have like tariffs, like United States, as soon as a car leaves China, the price doubles, right?
Double.
Like, I'm actually about to buy a Chinese car here now in Bali. You know, I think I'm trying to wait for BYD to bring their best-selling Seagull to Indonesia, but I can't wait anymore. So I'm gonna buy a Wuling Binguo, and that car. So the top of the line of that brand sells for $12,000 in China, but in Indonesia it sells for like $25,000. It more than double the price, but I was able to get some discount, and after rebate, you know, I got a $5,000 off. So I still have to spend $20,000. That's still like $8,000 more than what a Chinese consumer would have spent at home. So yeah, like the Chinese people are getting spoiled right now, and you know what? The sacrifice they're gonna have to make in this tariff war is they're gonna have to buy more cars, buy more laptops, buy more iPhones, and more shopping bags. And I think I highly suspect that Chinese government now have room to do stimulus. They can, you know, like money is easy to create, guys. You can just print money. it's a supply chain that's hard to create.
That is true. And that's the strategic thinking. Something we in the United States didn't consider, because we don't think in these terms. We think about the next quarter and so forth. So that is what has been always said. So let's talk about my last segment here before I let you go, Carl, because I can't let you go without asking you this question about BRICS. Now, I'm having my doubts about BRICS moving forward. So I know on papers, BRICS has the potential to become some sort of a major geopolitical and geoeconomic powerhouse. There is that possibility there. So, because when you consider the economic bloc that has already about 45%, if I'm not mistaken, of the world population, and also generates more than about 37% of its GDP. And this is measured by the PPP, the purchasing power parity. So, and it also produces about almost 32% of its oil. So, but where the problem is, and some analysts have been arguing this as well, that despite this aspiration, and this is what I'd like to have your insights, despite these aspirations to reform some sort of the global system, okay, assuming it can do that, BRICS, in my opinion, lacks the necessary structural power. This is again where I see the problem, to sort of rival what we call the establishment of other international order per se. Do you foresee the upcoming summit in Brazil going to lead to some change regarding the structural? Because here is, you have India, for example. Why can BRICS just ask India to leave? Because there is no mechanism by which they can do that.
Well, I mean, speaking of India, we don't even know what happens. Like in next week, there could be a war between India and Pakistan.
Yeah, and Pakistan.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
like right now, we don't even know what's gonna happen after that. But I think you're right. BRICS is not it's not a military alliance. It's not NATO, right? I mean, it started out as an economic forum. Literally started out as a marketing moniker pushed by Wall Street. I believe it was Goldman Sachs who came up with
that's correct
the terminology in order to sell emerging market stocks in Brazil, Russia, China, India, etc. And if you look at these countries, they have very different systems. The attractiveness of the BRICS is that it offer alternative, because they say,
that's
okay,
true.
well, it's all about multipolarity. We all respect sovereignty, but at the same time, it's not a really tight-knit group of alliance, kind of the way the NATO alliance was, or even G7, right? G7 is another group of economies, but G7, we all know that's just like U.S. and its vassal states, right?
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it has like half the world population, but that's mostly because BRICS groups China, India, and Brazil together, right? These are the world's top, and now Indonesia. You have the world number 1, number 2, number 4, number 5 most populous countries in the grouping. So of course, but India is pursuing its own independent foreign policy objectives, which at this point seems like it's trying to lean toward United States or the BRICS side, depending on how much like to maximize the benefit for you. I cannot blame them. I mean, that's what a country leader should do to maximize their own national interest. But
Carl, how can they do that? How can they do that when they couldn't negotiate with the Chinese, for example, instead of imposing 12% tariffs on the Chinese steel? Why don't they get into negotiations with the Chinese and figure it out?
Well, because India always have this this kind of thing against China. That's one of the biggest problem in the BRICS alliance is that India do not see eye to eye with China. Russia has, for its part, trying to bring India and China together for the longest time, because Russia is friends with both, but it just never worked because. And India right now rather work with United States. I mean, a lot of things that's happening right now. The timing is rather suspicious. When JD Vance is visiting India. I know there is a joke that JD Vance visited both and both guys, and he visited India and Kashmir. I know it's a meme, but still, you gotta think that the timing is suspicious. As soon as he went to India, and now the Kashmir attacks happened, and now of course, India is gearing up for confrontation with Pakistan, right? And this all happened, and Pakistan, for people who don't know, the China-Pakistan economic corridor is actually one of the most important a project in the Belt and Road Initiative project. So China invests a lot of money to stabilize Pakistan and to build the China-Pakistan corridor. And if the whole Kashmir issue get blown up, is if turn into a territorial war, there's already talks of or India can take over the Pakistan side of Kashmir, and including Gilgit-Baltistan, that where the China-Pakistan friendship highway goes through. So basically, will literally cut off the link between China and Pakistan, right? And also by extension, China's access to the Arabian Sea via land. So right now everything is in flux, and I think one of the reasons to keep India in the BRICS alliance is you rather keep India close rather than have India to be like a full-blown member of the US-led club, right? You don't want that to happen. So at least you want to keep India close. You have some leverage. You have some negotiation space by granting India a place at the table. But I agree with your analysis that this arrangement will mean the BRICS will not be the most effective kind of a tool for alliance. It's not because it's not. It's only a forum. It's an economic forum. And does it serve as a counterbalance to the U.S. hegemony? Well, rhetorically, yes, but if you delve into the devil is always in the detail. If you're actually looking into what that actually means, it probably doesn't mean a lot. That's where I think you are correct.
That's how I feel, and I've been starting to be convinced about this outcome. So I shall see when the summit in Brazil takes place. I'll keep my eyes open and see what we go from there. So. Well, Carl, I can't thank you enough, man, for really carving out time for us here to share your insights. I have one question from an avid supporter for the channel, Truth Seeker, an avid supporter of the channel here. Thank you very much for your super sticker. The question is China free trading with their Southeast Asia countries with no tariffs?
Well, I have to look up what if there is tariff, what the numbers are, because China has been negotiating with Southeast Asian countries in like free trade deal for a long time. There are China is like the like ASEAN plus one, right? And there used to be the funny thing is United States used to have a mechanism for keeping China out by promoting the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TTP. Remember?
TTP, yes.
That was Obama's baby. That was the Obama's baby to keep China out, to have like an economic forum for all the other Pacific nations, but not China. But then it comes the Republican Congress, and he comes with Trump. So Trump's like, no, we're not gonna have that. So Trump made China greater, man. That's why in the Chinese internet meme, Trump is called 川建国. Trump, the nation builder. The nation being China. Trump is always making China better and better option in the eyes of the world. That's where we are.
He miscalculated. I believe he miscalculated. So anyway, my friend, I once again, on behalf of the entire community, I'll say thank you for carving out time for us and sharing your knowledge and insights. It's always a treat, and I look forward to next time. On behalf of the entire community, we say thank you, Carl.